February 3, 1944. Kwajalein Atoll, Marshall Islands. 14:30 hours. Colonel Atsushi Asonuma, 43, commander of the Japanese 1st Amphibious Brigade's artillery regiment, stood in a captured American artillery position examining a 150mm howitzer his troops had overrun. The weapon was intact, abandoned by retreating American forces during the initial Japanese occupation 2 years earlier. Ammunition was scarce, but Asonuma had secured enough shells to conduct proper firing tests. He'd commanded artillery for 16 years. He understood Japanese Type 96 150mm howitzers intimately. Maximum range 11,900 meters, approximately 13,000 yards. This was considered adequate for Pacific Island warfare where engagement distances rarely exceeded 10,000 yards, but intelligence reports from Guadalcanal and New Guinea suggested American artillery outranged Japanese guns significantly. Asonuma had dismissed these reports as exaggeration. Artillery range was limited by physics. Similar calibers produced similar ranges. A 150mm howitzer and a 155mm howitzer shouldn't have dramatically different capabilities. The firing test would prove otherwise. What Asonuma discovered that afternoon would force Japanese artillery doctrine to confront an uncomfortable reality. American howitzers outranged Japanese artillery by 4,000 yards, and range superiority decided artillery battles before they began. By February 1944, American forces had been island-hopping across the Pacific for 18 months. Each campaign revealed tactical and technical lessons. One consistent lesson was that American artillery dominated Japanese artillery in every engagement. American guns fired more shells, faster, more accurately, and from longer range. Japanese artillery officers initially attributed American superiority to numerical advantage and ammunition abundance. These factors were real but not the complete explanation. The fundamental difference was design philosophy. Japanese artillery design emphasized mobility and reliability for an army expecting to fight in China and Southeast Asia, where roads were poor and logistics were difficult. The Type 96 150mm howitzer weighed 4,140 kilograms and could be moved by horses or light vehicles. The barrel was relatively short to reduce weight. This limited propellant capacity and therefore range, but Japanese doctrine prioritized mobility over range. American artillery design emphasized firepower and range. The M114 150mm howitzer weighed 5,800 kilograms, substantially heavier than Japanese equivalents. It required motor transport, but its longer barrel and larger propellant charges produced maximum range of 14,600 meters, about 16,000 yards. This 4,000-yard range advantage meant American artillery could destroy Japanese guns before Japanese guns could return fire. The M1 150mm gun, also designated M1 Long Tom, had even greater range. Maximum range exceeded 23,000 meters, over 25,000 yards. This allowed American artillery to reach targets anywhere on most Pacific islands, regardless of where guns were positioned. Japanese artillery had no equivalent long-range weapons in field armies. Colonel Asonuma's testing confirmed what intelligence reports had claimed. The captured American 150mm howitzer fired standard shells to ranges his Japanese howitzers couldn't approach. When Asonuma's artillery crews measured impact points and calculated range, the results were undeniable. American artillery could engage Japanese positions from beyond Japanese counter-battery range. This meant American guns could fire with impunity, while Japanese guns were destroyed without effective response. The implications for defensive tactics were severe. Japanese doctrine for defending Pacific Islands emphasized mutually supporting positions with artillery, providing fire support across the entire defensive zone. But if American artillery outranged Japanese artillery by 4,000 yards, American guns could systematically destroy Japanese artillery from standoff positions. Without artillery support, Japanese defensive positions became vulnerable to American infantry and armor. Asonuma wrote a detailed report to Imperial General Headquarters describing his findings and recommending immediate deployment of longer-range artillery to Pacific garrisons. The report, recovered from Japanese archives after the war, was technically accurate and tactically sound. But it arrived too late. By February 1944, Japan lacked industrial capacity to develop and produce new artillery designs in quantities needed. Even if such artillery existed, transportation to isolated Pacific islands would be difficult, given American submarine and air interdiction of Japanese supply lines. The report received acknowledgement, but no action. Asonuma's recommendations were filed and forgotten. Japanese artillery forces continued using Type 96 howitzers and similar weapons for the remainder of the war, consistently outranged by American artillery in every engagement. The range disparity wasn't the only American artillery advantage. American artillery doctrine emphasized massed fires, coordinated across multiple batteries and battalions. A single American forward observer could call fire from dozens of guns simultaneously. Time from fire request to shells landing was typically 2 to 3 minutes. Japanese artillery doctrine emphasized direct support of specific infantry units without systematic massing of fires. Forward observers had limited authority to call fires. Response times were 10 to 15 minutes. American artillery ammunition supply was effectively unlimited. Divisions allocated thousands of shells per gun per month. Forward observers called fire missions without ammunition constraints. If targets presented themselves, artillery engaged them. Japanese artillery received hundreds of shells per gun per month when logistics functioned normally, less during periods of supply disruption. Artillery commanders rationed ammunition carefully, engaging only priority targets. The systematic difference in artillery employment was cultural as well as technical. American artillery culture emphasized aggressive use of firepower. If artillery could destroy an enemy position, do it. Save American infantry lives by expending artillery shells. Japanese artillery culture emphasized conservation. Artillery was a limited asset to be preserved for critical moments. This often meant Japanese artillery remained silent to avoid counter-battery fire, then was destroyed by American artillery before firing. The effectiveness of American artillery became legendary among American infantry. Soldiers knew that calling for fire support brought rapid, massive, accurate response. This knowledge increased confidence and aggressiveness. Japanese infantry learned that their own artillery provided minimal support, while American artillery was omnipresent and deadly. This knowledge decreased confidence and forced defensive tactics. Lieutenant Colonel Takeo Yamasaki commanded Japanese forces on Attu Island during the May 1943 American invasion. His post-battle report, written days before he led a final banzai charge and died in combat, described American artillery impact. Enemy artillery fires continuously at any target identified. Our artillery responds briefly, then is silenced by overwhelming counter-battery fire. Enemy forward observers seem to see every movement. Within minutes, artillery shells rain down. Our men call enemy artillery the Iron Rain, and fear it more than infantry or tanks. We have no effective counter. Our artillery lacks range to engage enemy guns. When we attempt to move artillery to better positions, enemy aircraft or artillery destroys them during movement. We are being systematically reduced by firepower we cannot return. Yamasaki's assessment applied to nearly every Pacific battle. American artillery advantage wasn't subtle or marginal. It was overwhelming and decisive. Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Every island assault featured American artillery dominating Japanese artillery completely. The pattern was consistent. American guns destroyed Japanese guns, then provided fire support for American infantry against Japanese defensive positions without artillery support. The 4,000-yard range advantage translated directly to survivability. American artillery positioned 15,000 yards from Japanese defenses could fire effectively while being immune to Japanese counter-battery fire. Japanese artillery positioned within their 12,000-yard range of American targets were well within American 16,000-yard range and were destroyed systematically. The mathematical advantage was insurmountable. Japanese artillery crews recognized this disadvantage painfully. Corporal Yuki Nakamura, who served in an artillery regiment at Paleliu, was captured in November 1944. His interrogation included extensive questions about Japanese artillery doctrine and effectiveness. We knew American artillery was superior before we ever fired a shot. Our officers told us we must conserve ammunition and only fire at critical targets. Meanwhile, American artillery fired thousands of shells daily at everything they observed. We would prepare to fire, hoping to surprise American positions. Before we could complete firing procedures, American counter-battery fire would begin. How did they locate us so quickly? How did their shells arrive so fast? We felt like we were fighting an omniscient enemy who saw everything and struck everywhere simultaneously. Our guns were destroyed within days of battle beginning. After that, we were infantry without fire support facing an enemy with unlimited fire support. The sense of fighting an omniscient enemy came from American fire direction control systems. These centralized systems coordinated all artillery fires across a division or corps. Forward observers reported targets to fire direction centers. Fire direction centers calculated firing data and assigned battalions to engage targets. Multiple batteries fired simultaneously on single targets, creating concentrated destructive effects Japanese artillery couldn't match. American artillery also benefited from superior ammunition. Variable time proximity fuses, introduced in 1944, detonated shells at optimal height above ground, creating lethal fragmentation patterns over wide areas. Japanese forces had no equivalent technology. American white phosphorus shells created smoke and incendiary effects. American illumination rounds allowed night firing. The variety and sophistication of American ammunition exceeded Japanese capabilities significantly. Forward observer training provided another American advantage. American artillery forward observers were trained extensively in target identification, fire direction procedures, and adjustment techniques. They accompanied frontline infantry units constantly. Japanese forward observers had less training and less authority to call fires independently. This meant American artillery responded to battlefield developments in minutes while Japanese artillery responded in tens of minutes or not at all. The coordination between American artillery and infantry was practiced until it became automatic. Infantry knew how to identify targets for artillery. Artillery knew how to respond to infantry requests rapidly. This coordination was practiced in training and refined in combat. Japanese coordination between arms was less developed. Infantry often fought without artillery support simply because coordination mechanisms didn't function effectively under combat stress. After the war, American artillery practices became the worldwide standard. Every military studied American fire direction procedures, forward observer techniques, and ammunition management. The principles of massed fires, rapid response, and unlimited expenditure when tactically justified became doctrine globally. Japanese artillery officers who survived the war studied American methods and acknowledged their superiority. Colonel Asonuma survived the war. He was evacuated from Kwajalein before the final American assault. In a 1950 interview, he reflected on his artillery testing experience. "When I fired that captured American howitzer and measured the range, I understood immediately that we'd lost the artillery war before it began. Their weapons outranged ours fundamentally. Their doctrine was more aggressive. Their ammunition supply was unlimited. Their coordination was superior. Individual Japanese artillery crews were skilled and brave. But skill and bravery don't overcome a 4,000-yard range disadvantage. When you cannot shoot back, you die." That was the reality for Japanese artillery in the Pacific. We died unable to effectively return fire. The technical aspects of artillery design involve compromises between mobility, range, reliability, and cost. Japanese designers optimized for mobility and reliability, accepting range limitations. American designers optimized for range and firepower, accepting weight and mobility limitations. In Pacific Island warfare, where strategic mobility came from ships and tactical mobility from vehicles, American choices proved superior. Japanese artillery design for continental warfare proved inadequate for Pacific Island combat. The broader lesson applies to any competitive field. Superior range allows engagement on favorable terms. When one side can attack while being immune to retaliation, the other side cannot win through courage or skill alone. Range superiority in artillery is analogous to speed superiority in armor or communications superiority in coordination. It's a fundamental advantage that enables other advantages. Today, artillery remains a critical component of ground warfare. Modern artillery ranges exceed World War II weapons by factors of 2 or 3. Precision-guided munitions allow engagement of point targets at distances of 30 or 40 kilometers. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged. The side with longer-range artillery, better fire direction, and more abundant ammunition dominates the battlefield. Range matters. Coordination matters. Abundance matters. At the United States Army Field Artillery Museum at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, an M114 155mm howitzer is displayed alongside a captured Japanese Type 96 150mm howitzer. The size difference is visible but not dramatic. The range difference was dramatic and decisive. A placard explains that American artillery dominated Pacific battlefields not through individual weapon superiority, but through systematic advantages in range, ammunition, coordination, and doctrine. Students at the Field Artillery School study Pacific artillery battles as examples of how systematic advantages in multiple areas create overwhelming combat power. The lesson emphasized is that no single factor determines artillery effectiveness. Range, ammunition, coordination, training, maintenance all contribute. Excellence in one area without excellence in supporting areas produces limited results. Excellence across all areas produces dominance. A quote from General George Patton appears in the museum. "I don't like to pay for the same real estate twice. The artillery does the work." This philosophy characterized American artillery employment. Use firepower abundantly to save infantry lives. Japanese philosophy conserved artillery to preserve limited ammunition, often resulting in artillery being destroyed before it could be employed effectively. The 4,000-yard range advantage sounds like technical specification, but in combat, it meant Japanese artillery crews died unable to return fire while American artillery crews operated with relative safety. Technical advantages translate to life-and-death outcomes. Colonel Asonuma understood this when he tested the captured howitzer. Many Japanese artillery officers understood it. But understanding a problem doesn't solve it when industrial capacity and time to implement solutions don't exist. In February 1944, Japan had lost the artillery war completely. The weapons existed. The crews were trained. But the fundamental design choices made years earlier, optimizing for different warfare conditions, proved wrong for the Pacific. Correcting those choices required resources and time Japan didn't have. The war continued with Japanese artillery consistently outranged, outgunned, and overwhelmed. Range is freedom to engage without being engaged. In artillery, in business, in any competition, the side with longer reach operates on its own terms. The side with shorter reach operates on opponent's terms. Operating on opponent's terms means accepting disadvantages that courage cannot overcome. That was Japan's artillery reality. That remains a universal lesson.